He's got to write her down.
Okay, we'll start the work study.
Yes. At our last city council meeting, we voted to have a work study at 5:30 on this day. And it was to cover two areas, the area of the clarification and the area of the agenda. And so, yes.
Point of order, is this a work study in
This is
which
work-
no decisions can be made, or
That's
is
correct.
this
That's
a
correct.
special meeting of the ordinance committee?
This is a work study
Yes,
Of the ordinance committee?
of the whole council.
whole council. At the close of this, then I will call the ordinance committee to order. And we will bring, as I understand it, the ordinances to full council, which will follow tonight. Am I correct?
Correct.
No, you'll just bring them to full council. They've already been to
Yeah,
full
they've been.
council once,
Okay,
so you just,
But
it'll be voted on in the council.
My confusion lies in the fact that in a work study, if I'm correct, there should be no motions or decisions, it's purely discussion. And what we need, the problem is that there is not a motion from a referring committee that is also the city council, so we cannot, the points that you want to discuss will not be successfully achieved in the format of a work study. They can only be successfully achieved in the format of a committee meetings. So
The
this should not be.
committee meeting's already been had by the previous council,
And it's already been
and
voted.
it's already been read once.
Will there be a motion to take it to full council in this work study?
Not in the work study. Yeah, well,
Then how
what
will
you're,
it be referred to the full council? Again, I
because
just
it's
don't
already on the table,
It's
it's been read once.
understand. Okay,
And what you requested the other night is to have a work study on these two ordinances to discuss them. And that's what you'll be doing.
We
that
also
was
asked
not
for
my
a committee.
understanding.
Yeah.
My understanding was that we asked for 3 meetings.
No,
Okay.
the minutes,
May I finish what my understanding
Yes.
was? Was that we asked for a special meeting of the committee, ordinance committee, that we asked for a special meeting of the full city council to consider any recommendations that came from that committee. And that was in order to address this situation with these two ordinances appropriately. And then separate from that entirely, we requested a work study in order to discuss the committee, the standing committees of the city council.
the minutes, yeah, the minutes are right here, what you
The
requested.
draft of the minutes are here. Under new business. Okay, under the ordinance committee, Mr. Hoffman stated that Mrs. Adams has submitted some information. Now we don't need to worry about that. Mr. Hoffman stated that a work study for the two ordinances still pending would need to be scheduled because the new members of the council. A work study has been scheduled for April 15th at 5:30 with a special council meeting immediately following the passing of the ordinances.
But when that was brought up, I said that cannot be done in a work study, it has to be done in a committee.
I recall that
Yeah.
as well.
But that's true, it already had one reading.
I know it did, but we weren't involved in it, that's
Well,
the
that
problem.
doesn't really hold true because you weren't elected until April.
Right,
The first reading was already completed prior to
well, if that was
April.
the case, then we should have
So
just
the
gone ahead
only-
and passed it.
Well, that's what I thought too, but the second reading will come up tonight in the special session.
I don't have any problem with continuing with it on this way as long as you assure me that we are not breaking our own ordinance in that way. It seems to me it would have been prudent to just go ahead and have a special meeting of the committee, in which case there would be no question about the application.
Well, the other committee had passed it to the full council, they had one reading. And they didn't have the second reading, that was supposed to be in April, when we had our first council meeting. What was, and instead of going into and having the second reading on the ordinance, the council, after you said we'd like to, study it. So what we did, Chuck wanted to have a work study, so we had the work study tonight. But that's just to explain the ordinance, it wasn't to change anything that happened. The second reading comes up.
I disagree, but
Yeah, I asked Lori for the point on that. My understanding is that it has to go back to be reintroduced again. Am I correct?
In what time frame?
I think that's correct.
That's why we're gonna have the ordinance
The
committee
way
meeting
we're
tonight,
gonna-
yeah.
And then you refer to 110-240,
Yes,
which reads, the mayor, if my copy is correct, the mayor and council shall only consider bills or ordinances previously reviewed in some written form and referred to the full council by the ordinance committee or other appropriate committee. Any referring committee must consist of current city council members.
so the point of this meeting was to make sure that the referring committee consists of the current city council members. The fact that it's on the table now as referred by a committee that did not consist of these city council members is problematic. It's happened in the past, and it needs to be addressed in terms of our process of transitioning to a new city council and our ordinances. And the point was to go back and make sure we're in compliance with our ordinance, not to have a work study or discuss the ordinance in great detail, but simply to do it appropriately.
The last sentence in that ordinance is kind of vague, because obviously, if something's before full council and had the first reading, it was sent over by a referring committee, you know, in this case, the ordinance committee, that at the time of the referral were current members. I mean, that would be obvious. So why would this last sentence be here unless it was the intent of the council that passed this ordinance that when it goes to a first or second or third reading, that the ordinance committee, which is the referring committee, be current council members.
That's the way we read it.
Otherwise, this sentence doesn't make any sense because it would just be a tautology.
Mhm.
I mean, you would always be in that situation, so if you don't want that to be the result, then you might want to consider amending 110-240
Right.
to get rid of that. Otherwise, I guess the other procedure is these two ordinances, which I'm assuming they had council support, they had re-refer it, have the ordinance committee just re-refer them now.
Except we don't have
Yes,
a public meeting scheduled for the
Well,
ordinance committee.
you gotta do all that.
We have to do all that, but. which
For
I
that
thought was
last
what
sentence in that ordinance to make any sense, it's saying that when full council considers it, you can't consider anything unless those ordinance committee people are still on board.
right. And that goes back to what I have said in the past is, and this is just my opinion, okay, is new council members should be seated after all one business is completed, like when new business comes up. And then that way the other council, whoever refers this stuff, when there's a transition, they can take care of their old business and then we can start on new business. Just a thought.
I would suggest that the ordinance committee take that up as a topic to try to revise and streamline this process so we don't run into this every time the council
There's
changes.
no posting for the ordinance committee that we can tonight, right?
Correct, that's the problem. The public meeting notice is not as, I understood it should have. I did inquire last Friday about that.
Well, and I talked to MML and they said as long as it was a work study, you didn't have to have two separate work studies. You could have all the work study in one.
But this isn't a work study, right?
To the minutes, it is a work study.
think that's an error in the minutes. I recall Kathy making that correction when we requested the meeting.
So we can do a work study tonight. But then we have to,
We can also have a full council meeting, but I don't see that that gives us an advantage.
because we have to bring it. to
Cause the only reason we were gonna have the council meeting was to pass these ordinances.
Yeah.
Cause knowing they have to be passed, I mean, it's not something that we can just keep putting off forever.
A notice of a committee meeting should have been part of it.
And now needs to be, as I would understand it, that would be the fastest route would be to.
Yeah, and if you don't wanna be here, you know, after the next election, change one thing
Yes.
before it. But
Yes.
until you change that, and that must relate to something. There's a principle law regarding legislative action that, no legislature is bound by the acts of the previous legislature. That's why legislatures can repeal previous act, and no legislature can enact a law which prevents a future legislature from doing something. Although I can cite you an example where that actually happened, because everybody wanted it to happen.
So I don't,
Okay, so
you've called the work study to order, and I think we can proceed with that, but I don't think that we're gonna have any traction with talking about these ordinances.
No.
Although since my understanding of the work study is it is a pretty free-form thing, we might address that, I gave you a handout that I believe there is a problem with one of those ordinances. In particular,
110.
110, okay.
it doesn't
She
exist.
has
I have talked to Sullivan Publications on that. And evidently, when the books were recodified back
Well,
2008, 2010, when they redid the whole book, that was taken out. The reason that it was taken out is because basically what they said was that is an administrative process to set the agenda. If we have it in ordinance form, then every month at the council meeting, you're gonna have to vote to accept the agenda.
and I would.
And if it's not in ordinance form, then if you wanna change the agenda, that's the only time you would have to make a motion to change the agenda, to move anything around that you wanted to do.
It gives
So
the mayor
it's-
far more latitude in terms of running an instructed meeting. If that is
So,
an ordinance,
right.
it's simply a matter of your
In
administrative.
that case, if you wanted to move new business up before old business, you could do that with a vote of the council. And that's why it was taken out of the code book.
Okay.
I asked them too, then if we had to go back and repeal that ordinance, and they said no, that when you recodified the book, that automatically
It
repealed it.
automatically took care of it.
So.
And I witnessed that conversation.
So it's kind of up to you, if you want it to be in ordinance form, we can do it in ordinance form, or if you wanna just leave it administrative,
And that was the agenda, right? I was
Yeah.
silly having
so, I
it
mean,
myself.
Mhm.
And
so that's kind of up to you now, is it,
So really, codifying is really what we have to be talking about tonight.
and that ordinance is done by Sullivan, so there's really nothing I can change on that.
I do think that there's an extended conversation here, which is probably more important than anything else we've discussed so far, most of which has been procedural nuts and bolts. The fact that we were in a situation where we were considering a second reading of an ordinance with a number that would have replaced or been in conflict, we were voting to amend a section that was a totally different section. And that we didn't notice that until the second reading, there was a failure in our orchestration of examining ordinances and the process that we go through for us to ever be in that situation. We should never be in that situation. I think it's the role of an ordinance committee to make certain that that kind of a thing doesn't happen. So I don't know how we address it, but that's a big deal, in my opinion. I don't know if there's a way to
hopefully
fix
we'll
it.
have our books soon.
Once you
So I'm here to facilitate, and you people are here to comment.
Well, I would suggest that we toss that out, my opinion to the ordinance committee would be to simply not reconsider that, not pass that particular one on, that we don't need to dictate to the mayor what he wants his agenda to be. I think Tom, the mayor ought to be able to design an agenda that is most effective for the business of the day and help us move through it.
Before, Bart, we didn't have an agenda ordinance. And when I came back, they did have an agenda ordinance. But the agendas are actually set, I talked to Sharon and I talked to Brock. And because they're here every day, all day. And anything that comes up, I ask them if they have for an agenda. I don't have any problem with the structure the way it is or the way that your suggestion would go.
I think we should give you the flexibility to conduct the meeting as effectively as possible.
Okay.
So that would be my suggestion.
And you're talking about this one, right? Just
Just
the 110 one.
the other one's a no-brainer. It's simply,
Yeah,
we have to have
if,
action instead of codify.
if you go with what Bart's saying, and what you're saying, Kathy, is you actually don't need an ordinance per se.
Right, and it's already out of the book anyway.
Yeah, because what'll happen is then you've got to script agendas.
You know, I think what facilitated that was the suggestion by the Sunshine Committee when they were here. You know, that we get rid of that last section of the.
That's been adopted.
You know,
And that's why that was done.
Yeah. and so, you know, we just don't keep that.
Okay, if that's the council's
Unless
pleasure,
it's,
then let's go that route.
We can't make any decision on it. It's just the ordinance committee decides to move
Yeah,
forward with
They
those.
can remake that report on their committee.
And the other one,
we can't, we go back over this, we can just simply say, we're not gonna bring it to the full council.
It's killed it.
It's building committee.
the other ordinance, I don't know that there's any discussion on it, simply to go ahead and codify so we can get our books.
Yeah.
Which we really need
Which-
to do.
So we can look up things that,
So you anticipate the codification orders will pass through committee and be reviewed.
I can't think of any
Right.
reason it wouldn't.
either. It's just one of those administrative things that we have to do, so.
By the time you get there,
Okay. If we're finished on that, then we'll go to committees.
I wasn't sure exactly what the format is. One of the things I did notice about work studies is that we don't really have, or at least I didn't know where to look for any formal description of how these are conducted.
There isn't any.
Again, that may be something the council, or it may not need to be an ordinance, it could be a resolution or something, but we might want to give these structures so people know how to bring,
MML does not even script them.
right, so.
Because they said you can call them a work study, you can call them this, you can call them
Whatever you
that.
want.
Yeah.
It's just a free-for-all, okay, well, I'll do it. But if it's okay with Tom, I did prepare just some questions, that I thought might guide our conversation, so we could, get to key points. And,
Do you have some copies there?
if we need more copies.
No.
Suffice. So what I did was I simply put 110 there, so we all have easy reference to it. And then I asked some questions, those questions being for the audience, what are the responsibilities of the city council regarding 110? In other words, what's our job, right? The city council, what's our job? Description based on 110. Number two, why do we have standing committees at the city council? What are they intended to accomplish? What is their purpose? I think we need to know that. We can talk about some examples of what those things are so that we can make those decisions towards a purpose. Number 3, what should the characteristics of a standing committee of the city council be? And what should this be about? Is this focus, where is its focus, how should it conduct itself? If we did, in number 4, this is the real open-ended one, just to brainstorm. If we didn't have the committees we currently do, what committees would you imagine filling the purpose, as we previously described in that former question, of the standing committees? What would the best committees be that we could come up with to do this job, to achieve that purpose? And number 5, how should the concurrence re committee membership be handled by the council? I don't want to dictate to the mayor the way that he handles appointment, that is the way it's described in the current ordinance. And given that, what is our role? How should we approach that? How should we make that decision to try to facilitate the most functional city local government that we can have? Do these questions sound like a reasonable way to pursue this work study?
Well, what I would suggest to the whole council, you've got these questions here, and you're hitting us cold turkey with, to come up with answers, why? And they're good questions. I think that probably when you have, after we take these here and study them and come back with an answer, then we can go and have another work study and hash it about.
I like that very much. Maybe in preparation for that, because, and I understand you're getting hit cold turkey with my questions, but I certainly hope I'm not hitting you cold turkey with your own research. I've spent several days looking at this and reading other city codes and talking to MML. And so, these were the questions that came out of many hours of my investigation. I can share where, and maybe this would help. If we're going to adopt these questions as format, this would certainly help you know what direction I was thinking. And then I'm not trying to dictate it, I'm just trying to give us grounds for traction in our conversation.
Well, Bart, and if I'm having the understanding correctly about this work study, there's no set format, so it could be more of a brainstorming situation anyway, right?
Absolutely.
I find that, coming off the cuff, sometimes, not for full answers, but to just brainstorm some ideas of what we're talking about here. And I think it's a good script to facilitate at least a few opinions around the council to kind of start filling the blanks. So that's just me. I don't think it's something we can take 3 hours doing, but I think we can hit a few points.
But at the same time, I think what you have prepared and what you have gotten, would be appropriate to disseminate that before any discussion.
I didn't have this until tonight, a little bit ago.
I don't hold any fault with that. So.
I actually correct that, but the election's on Tuesday, and the mayor's got, 6 days to come up with.
Right, that's a great one. We have a particular ordinance, right, 110-110, which was written by the city council, right, adopted by the city council. 110-110 can be amended. It can be amended to anything that is compliant with state statute and federal law. Well, that's where it says at the first meeting of the city council held after the city election of each year. So for instance, we could address giving time to discuss or for you to have a more, to get to know your council, we could shift that somewhere, or we could
And
address
that's what I'm
that.
suggesting, what research, extensive research.
That was
Oh, I'm sorry.
concerned with, you go like a month without a committee being built.
That would have to be a part of how you would address it, yes, that's correct. So there are some committees, for instance, the functioning of the ordinance committee, which we've just seen, fail in this situation, or the water committee, which has very defined by ordinance specific roles that you can't do without those. But you have other committees that you can. The fire and the police committee, they should not be, as my understanding it, they're not here to micromanage Bob. Bob handles day-to-day stuff. They're here to, as you explained to me after our last meeting, Tom, Mayor Wallace, sorry, that they were invented in order to give voice to a section of government that needed representation and a voice and a way to access this body more directly, which I think is and maybe that's a good cut into some of the examples of number two. But they're not, I mean, going a month without those committees is maybe preferable to jumping into committees that don't know what's going on or aren't the appropriate ones or whatever, if even those are the committees we should have.
I think Kathy made a good suggestion. We seat the new council at a later time. And that gives you a month to get your committees together and inform people who you would like to have on the committee.
I didn't
It's
understand that.
ultimately the council who has to agree to it.
I didn't understand Kathy's statement as that.
Well,
Well, I took it, instead of having it, like we have the opening and whatever, and then we adjourn and seat the new council, I thought she meant farther down in that meeting, after it says old business is complete, then you adjourn and seat the new council. Not a month later, it's the same meeting, but farther down on the
That's the
page.
way
yes,
I
that's exactly what I meant. But at the same time, Chuck is right, because then you're not gonna be giving us what committees we're gonna be on so that we can address the old minutes. That still gives you a whole nother month to get the committees together.
Would there be a legal issue there?
Well, I'm wondering with committees like finance, don't they have to be up and running so they can refer warrants before
We have to
council?
pay the bills.
Well, but if they go through all the old business first, which that would be old business, according to our agenda that we have. If we go through all this, and then down here, seat the new council,
If I can make a point of order to that question, that no,
I just
I
wonder
don't
how that
believe
would
so.
work.
that's true of water. That's not true of finance. In fact, one of the issues that I stumbled across in this is the fact that these committees are not defined except for by a title. The duties, which are our responsibility, it is wholly the responsibility that we, the council, not the mayor, not anybody else, us 8, to describe the powers and duties of standing committees, but we haven't done that. We did that for water through an ordinance. It doesn't have to be done through an ordinance, it can be done through a resolution or even an order of business or something like that. But we've defined that for water, but we haven't defined that for finance. There's nothing that I see or that I'm aware of, please correct me if I'm wrong, that indicates that finance has to even be a committee. There is something that indicates in ordinance that we have very specific responsibilities and duties for water.
even so, if we did that, the way I described it, we're gonna get the finance is gonna be done, that's the very first committee that the old council would be addressing and paying all the warrants. Because that's when all the committees are done. And that's been a concern of mine for several years, is that, you're seating a new council and they're addressing stuff that they weren't part of. And I never thought that was, Tom and I talked about that.
We talked about that before,
Yeah.
and I agreed with you at the time,
Uh-huh,
but like I told you at the time, I didn't make that ordinance.
right, but, so here's the ordinance, and that's the reason we did it, but,
It doesn't exist now.
right, and we didn't know that at the time.
But being now that we've already decided that we can do this, then that won't be a problem,
Right.
because and you don't have to do it every time, you do it on election night
Right.
only.
Right, exactly, that's the
That would work.
and I just wanna throw that
And
out
we
to
wouldn't-
everybody.
We wouldn't be in the dilemma on the ordinance tonight.
But the committees would take effect in the next.
Right, in the next,
That's great.
and then that gives you more time to, or anybody, if you, like, I know from the get-go, when you were seated, you wanted to be on water. So,
And I have a strong interest in ordinance.
right,
Well, see, let me give you my reasoning too, it says I got 6 days to come up with committee.
And it's hard,
I put Sal on finance because he works with finance.
and it totally
Okay.
makes sense.
I put Kathy on grants because she's worked with grants. Now, this is my thinking. I put Russell on police because he sat that chair for a while. Monroe works with water, he's plumber, mechanic, electrician, the whole bit, okay? Chuck served on the ordinance committee before. Jim Woods' dad used to have an asphalt company here, he knows street and alleys. Larry works with a lumberyard, and he knows the woods and the building part. Now that, and like you,
I'm sure you have some opinions about me too.
well, everybody has opinions, Bart, but
What
I
you just
didn't,
said,
I
Tom,
didn't know.
What you just said, I wanna thank you, because in my way of seeing this, and the reason I asked in our last meeting, knowing what your thoughts are is hugely helpful to me, going, that makes sense. If you don't give me that, then it's very difficult for me to say, that makes sense. I want to come to agreement, but I'd also like to be heard.
Right. Well, you know, and I'm gonna say this to you, all the council, my door is open all the time. If they have a question, Sal can tell you that. Kathy knows that.
I know that too.
You know
I've
it.
visited you.
Anybody can come in, and if they ask me, say, hey, what's happening, or what's going on, or they have a question, if I don't have an answer, I will get it for you. But that was my reasoning on the committees. And I put you on 4 committees.
Yes, you did.
And actually, water, it to me is a big committee. I mean, that's just my thinking now.
I didn't mean for us to get
And I thought
into,
that you'd be a go-getter on the grant area, because you play with the computer quite a bit. I mean, now, these
I try
are,
to call it play.
well, this is not to slam you or anything, it's just telling you how I arrived at some of these committees.
And I don't think that the point of our work study was to come to some conclusion about who should be on what committees. I think we're trying, the work study's focus should be a higher level notion about how this local government orchestrates itself through the use of standing committees. A lot of, when I looked at other ordinances, a lot of other cities, and I don't know if you have experience on it as an attorney with other cities, maybe you can comment to this. I talked to several city attorneys who do, and asked them about standing committees. Many of them don't have them, or have 1 or 2, or have a lot of the functions we're dealing with in committees done through commissions, which generally are comprised of citizens in connection with some liaison on the council. So there's a lot of ways this thing could be arranged, but if our chosen vehicle is standing committees, and I think it's a wonderful vehicle, then I think we need to know more about what they're supposed to be doing, and maybe we can adjust them so that we're more effective in our committees, and we can do better business for the city of Louisiana.
Higher efficiencies, I think there's definitely avenues, and that's what I thought this work study was about. You know, and again, I'm new, so bear with me on the logistics of everything, but that's the exciting part for me, was to try to get our voice in and be heard, as Bart said, about finding some efficiencies for all of us to get some things done. You know, Larry and I have been talking and making some headway here in the next week, just on the ball fields. You know, little things like that we get things accomplished. The one thing I want to see personally, again, I know this is a collective unit, but I want to see, you know, and I'm not saying it hasn't happened, I'm just saying I'd like to see while I'm on this council, one thing accomplished at a time and moving on to the next thing. I think higher efficiencies will help us do that. So, you know, am I wrong in my assumption that this is what this work study is about, Bart? I'm trying to.
That's certainly the way I would have framed it, because.
Well, remember that Jefferson said the idea of a Congress is so that the government is not too efficient.
Wow. I think we can some efficiencies at this point now. I mean,
I think that,
Well, the most efficient government ever was Nazi Germany, so, you know, you don't want government really to be too efficient.
Nobody printed.
You do want a little
That
flavor.
was Robert, because that was.
I just tell you that, you know, democracy is not, it's a very imperfect experiment,
Sure.
and I think it's supposed to be
I
imperfect. You're not gonna get out every inefficiency
Right.
and
No, no,
make
no,
it perfect.
that's not my point. My point was to collectively work as a unit, and I think those committees were built that way. And the efficiencies I'm talking about is getting efficient on a committee.
And efficient communication.
Right.
Communication, not to take over and do things.
Did anybody ever explain why the water is in the bill? The one time we had a board of public works. which was
Yes.
separate.
Yes, and I do understand that, yes.
But then we also have to be very careful when we define these things, is that we are not overstepping our bounds and moving over into what Bob's duties are.
Yeah, you know, and I keep putting these little flyers in the councilman's box, and you all got them, I put them in there again. There's 3 forms of city government. Judicial, executive, and legislative.
And we're the legislature.
And you are the legislature. You make the rules and regulations, and it's Bob's and my job to carry them out.
Right.
On that note, I find it interesting, I'm anxious for the MML training, because one of my questions is that it's very clear that in a small city especially, you also have this odd role of being a liaison for between the citizens and the city. And that's a tricky slope, which we've seen.
That's your
Now,
nastiest slope.
It is a really tricky thing that is a part of what, and it's a good thing that we do, right? But that's something we may want to consider at some time.
That's probably the most difficult aspect of your position,
Yeah, I agree.
as it is for the mayor, because you will get calls from folks at any and all hours of the night.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Bob and I compare notes every Monday morning on how many calls we get. And Bob, and I want to say this in Bob's behalf, when I was mayor prior to having an administrator, I received 99% of those calls on the weekend. Now Bob gets 99%.
Always at
So
some.
Bart, you're on the streets and alley too?
I'd have to, yes, I know, yes.
Yeah. I'll refer half the calls to you over potholes.
Exactly,
They
exactly
come
so.
in late at night too.
But here's an interesting thing, what if the citizens had a better mechanism to talk about or report and track progress on potholes, okay?
And call
Well-
Bob.
But what if we empowered Bob with a communications committee that could produce a procedure or an app? I mean, a lot of that could be handled online, and I understand a big percentage of our population isn't online, but a big percentage is, and a growing percentage. And it could be mirrored in offline processes. But if we had a communications committee that could say, okay, that's something I wanna take on. I wanna facilitate the ability of citizens to say, I've got a problem with this street out here around this corner where a snowplow hit a grate, and get feedback, hey, we've got this on our list, and we've come out and checked it, and now we've fixed it, and we consider this issue to be done. A lot of cities do that, but we don't have a mechanism to even get to that conversation, right? So I think that's a good example of a purpose that a committee could form.
Go ahead.
Okay, we've got the report that we fill out, we get calls. I got one the other night, I referred them to Tom. But if you fill that form out and it goes to Bob, you keep a copy and it doesn't get overlooked. When I fill the forms out, they get taken care of.
But why go to you, why go to Tom, why not go straight to the form?
Well, you're overloading Bob. If we get 6 or 7 calls about the same thing, you write it down, you give it to Bob, and then Bob makes a decision and gets it done.
I don't see why you couldn't have both.
Why he doesn't what?
I don't
We
see-
can't, I can't go to the street department and give them an order.
Right.
I can't go to the fire department, give them an order. I give them to Bob.
We have a work plan that's given to all the council. And the council fills it out. It goes to Bob. And then,
I've got someone like this.
and that's why,
I think we could set something. on
I
the
understand,
website.
I
Right, I
understand,
understand that
I
too.
understand.
I think we
There's
could
a
set
lot.
something,
I think that
You
that
can do as a
process
dual
would
purpose,
even be better.
and we can set something on the website. I don't have a problem with that.
And that process could be done such that when I go to put in something on the corner of Fourth and
Yeah.
Georgia,
It
I can
comes
see,
directly
I
to
can
me.
see, hey, somebody's already said
Yeah.
there's a problem on Fourth and Georgia, and in fact, they've already looked at it, and it's in progress. I'm saying we can do the process better to take, not to add load to Bob,
I don't have a
to
problem
make
with it.
it less.
Makes it easier in a way.
It's an accountability issue.
Because that way I can address it sooner than spending time, maybe you're out of town for a day or two before it gets passed on to me. So then I have no problem. I don't have a problem.
You got it.
well, why don't we do this? We're talking about committees and stuff. Why don't we go ahead and fill this out? We're not gonna have a council meeting tonight, because there'd be no need for it. Fill this out, and then have each council person come up with what they would like to see. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm not saying it to be vindictive or anything. I'm just saying it because we voted on the committees in
They are in
April, and they're in place for 1 year. And I just,
Could you add to them committees?
there's no provision.
Yes, I would say yes, there is a provision, because, and the provision is 110, and it is this provision. By and with the concurrence of the city council, to appoint such standing committees as the city council may by resolution or rules of order establish. We can,
You'd have to
if we
change.
want right now to get rid of the water committee, we can do that, not Tom. It's not an administrative act, it's a legislative act per 110. If we want to create a different committee, we can do that, right now. Well, not right now in this meeting, but as,
Have
as,
nine instead of eight, if we want.
I'm sorry?
We have 9 committees instead of 8.
That's possible, it does propose, and it actually, I thought about that. The requirement here is that it be composed by ordinance, and we can amend this ordinance, okay, then we can change this requirement, but right now, by this ordinance, we have to have 4 members with 1 member from each ward on a standing committee. It doesn't say you can only have, but it says you have to have 4, 1 member
Of each ward on each committee.
But it does not prescribe the 8. The 8 is just mathematically a factor of all of us having equal duty,
That's
right? And
I've always thought there should be a personnel committee.
Yeah, human resources.
And we have a commission which could, in fact, if you look at the ordinance, Article 4 is the committee, is the water committee, and then I think it's Article 4, right? And then the next committee is the Human Resources Commission, and even structurally in the ordinance, you could have a commission to do some of these tasks. If it would be more appropriate that citizen involvement, if direct citizen involvement would be beneficial to the purpose of that committee, or that group, then it probably should be a commission, not a standing committee.
But the city is the employer.
Yeah,
The city's the employer. And I would have to suggest that only in an instance when it was, the expertise was over and above what the council person had.
I hear you.
That would be my qualifier.
I'm not suggesting that it be, I'm illustrating that it can be.
I just think they need to.
Well, why don't we get all the suggestions from the council? of what
Would it be
they-
helpful if I read mine? I've already answered them. That
Why
would
don't you-
I'd say just disseminate,
Yeah, why don't you just give us a list?
and that way we've got the chance to digest them.
I wanna hear it, if you ain't got a copy.
I don't have, what I didn't wanna do, I wanted this to be very open. I want every person's input out on this table. I did not want to dictate,
I'd like to
Those
hear
answers.
So could you?
so I just gave you questions.
Could you put that in my box?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mine too.
You can give that to Sharon and she can put it on all the
Absolutely.
I'd be interested in your.
Yeah, I would too.
I can read them now.
That'll give time for them to reflect upon
Yeah.
rather than,
And
being
it-
put
it
on the
easier
spot
to
at this
have
time.
refer back to.
Yeah. Okay, if that's agreeable with everybody,
We want to reschedule another work study on this topic then? I mean, that was the suggestion you made?
Next committee,
Next committee meeting?
It's not a committee, it's full council, but we could schedule it in concurrent with the
I
next.
should review it and then at the next committee meeting, establish the next work study.
Yeah.
Before, that'll be before
If-
the
if-
council.
If we could get these filled out and just Sharon, we could disperse it for all of us to chew on before the next meeting and really all be prepared instead of bringing our meeting or our ideas
Right.
to the next meeting.
Instead of coming into it full.
Wasting, not wasting, but let's do our prep work before that.
Right.
This
well,
way
if you fill this out and you have your ideas already,
Right.
bring them in and give them to Sharon.
And then we can put them in each respective council person's mail slot.
And we could chew on it after that.
Why don't we just informally agree to all get that to Sharon by next Monday? Then if we all check our box next Monday, we all have everyone's opinion. But that does give us time to start, so that at the next one, but I think if we want to discuss it, are we gonna discuss it in full council, or are we gonna discuss it,
I think what
have a
you,
work study after the
I
committee?
think you need a work study.
So we need, and to be clear, so we don't have a problem again,
No,
we need a work study
crystal
scheduled
clear.
after the city council
After the
committee.
May
But
meeting.
make that as a motion in council to have the work study.
But we don't,
In committee meeting in May.
because we can call a special meeting if, how many, two plus, three plus you, or just three?
Well, I can call it without the council, but it takes 3 councils.
Okay,
But you can't wait till after to make a motion at the next meeting, because then you're a month behind.
we can do it at the next council committee
Committee
meeting,
meeting.
and then by,
Right.
and then the
Six.
following week is the full council meeting, and we could act on anything we thought we ought to do.
But how do you get this work study? We need a motion to have this work study.
That's what I'm saying, three of us, me and you and Chuck can call a special meeting of the city council for that purpose. We can call a work study meeting. That's correct?
On that
So we just need to get together and formally do that with Sharon so she can make a public notice so we can have an official.
will that be right before the committee meeting?
I would say right after,
After?
because this is open-ended in the committee meetings.
Same night?
Same night, right after.
In between the committee meeting and the next council meeting.
Yeah.
Would be ideal.
It'd be,
Finances are in the break, then you do your work study.
Oh, no, I was suggesting,
Usual.
I was suggesting after the,
first Monday.
after the 7 committee meetings, so
Okay,
that we have that week to bring to full.
all agreeable?
So that'd be May sixth?
Okay, so
Let me get it out of the.
Yeah,
You gonna do it, you gonna do it.
what's that?
Well, if Mark's gonna have three names.
He's gonna get 3 council, we call a special session.
Okay, Kathy, me, and I need one more.
Is that just,
Right.
or whatever.
As many as.
Let's reach across the aisle. I'd like you to be a part of it. Me and you and Kathy will make that
So
motion.
are we gonna do what are we gonna do about this codifying the,
You're gonna have to wait until the next council.
we're just gonna wait till next council?
Absolutely.
That's fine, I just wanna be clear on it, what we were gonna do.
Then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
You're gonna call me tomorrow, Ann?
Leon.
How you
doing?
You're gonna call me tomorrow?
Yeah.
I'll be in town. 05999.
My son would practice.
You go to
I'll call Mike.
Goodbye.
You know, I don't remember that well.
I'll tell you, but I don't, I don't want to lose this friend.
Well, I think it might be, maybe they'll talk to the
CFW Hall. Great, she always did it. Every Saturday night she did it. And she was good. I just wondered how she was doing.
I talked to her, she likes doing pretty good, she doesn't like how, they already have deals when they come to her, that's one thing she said. But other than that,
She's not so right, you're gonna be fine. I just hope you don't ever see her. She got a kick out, she said, better? I said, she said, I'll do it. Hey, I
think she'd be really fair,
she'd be fair.
and she's got, so many different things, different, ways of looking at it, so
She'll be fair. You're not gonna get no hanky panky.
and I'm not even gonna talk about
It's not either, but I told her,
I'm usually never, usually.
you're on the perception that I'm gonna work right now.
Yeah. Me too. That's why I think I'm like, I'm not necessarily party or always person or look and see what's going on.
Here to right the pie.
I will.
Just for Leon, sir.
I'm gonna try to get lunch with her one of these days, but she's so busy. All right.
Carolyn was too excited. Basically.